In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God.
And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good.
That was the true light, which lighteth every man that cometh into the world.
Enoch walked with God 300 years. Altogether, Enoch lived 365 years.
The words of the blessing of Enoch, but not for this generation, but for a remote one, which is for to come.
Thoth went by many other names, and in the Old Testament Bible, he was known as Enoch.
Thoth, the god of magic and writing.
Thoth created geometry, mathematics, language, astrology.
Enoch, translated in the Quran as Idris in Arabic, Idris, alayhi salam.
And he is the first man to ever write with the pen. So writing before Idris did not exist.
Ten 10,000 years after people, almost all traces of mankind and its culture are buried beneath vegetation and sand.
10,000 years from now, there would certainly be some things that you would see, pyramids of Egypt, perhaps, but very, very little of human existence would actually be recognizable in the absence of humans.
Dreaming of immortality, man tried to make his mark on the world. But those marks have been erased.
Imagine some kind of global catastrophe, a doomsday event. Civilization has collapsed, and the vast majority of humanity has died. But some survive.
People from advanced civilizations actually do not have survival skills. But people who are hunter-gatherers are masters of survival.
The Waste Isolation Pilot Plant, or WIPP, is a U.S. Department of Energy facility designed for the safe, permanent disposal of transuranic radioactive wastes left from our nation's nuclear defense programs.
Nuclear energy is one of the cleanest, most efficient, and most available sources of power on Earth. But the biggest problem with nuclear energy is not the risk of meltdown, it's not the supply of uranium, it's this: nuclear waste. Nuclear material is perhaps the most poisonous substance on Earth.
Nuclear waste, the radioactive and toxic byproducts from making nuclear energy and weapons, is a serious health hazard, and America has a lot of it.
There are more than 71,000 tons of nuclear waste stranded at the nation's 104 reactors.
It gets more radioactive after it spends time in a nuclear reactor. Because that chain reaction that generates heat, it also makes other radioactive atoms like cesium-137, strontium-90, and plutonium-239. About half of the cesium and strontium decay in 30 or so years. The plutonium, that takes longer, like 24,000 years longer.
The half-life of plutonium is 24,100 years. We consider something gone after 10 half-lives. So 240,000 years.
Most of that nuclear waste is stored in pools of water. Water does a decently good job of shielding radiation, so this is an inexpensive and easy way of storing the rods. Once nuclear waste has cooled down in storage pools for 10 to 20 years, it typically is encased in casks. These concrete and steel containers block in radiation, but this solution is far from permanent. It does not consider earthquakes, it cannot withstand tsunamis, and it would not work without humans. These casks require security and they require maintenance. The fuel rods will remain radioactive enough to emit a lethal dose for tens or hundreds of thousands of years past their removal. So the question is, what do you do with them? The answer is simple: put them somewhere where they can stay, undisturbed, isolated, forever. But that's not all that easy.
The Waste Isolation Pilot Project, or WIPP.
The WIPP is a massive storage site for radioactive waste in the southeastern plains of New Mexico, organized by the U.S. Department of Energy.
Experts throughout the world agree that the most feasible and safe method for disposing of highly radioactive materials is to store them deep underground.
Long-term nuclear waste storage needs to last longer than any political structure, it needs to work without the supervision of humans, it needs to be truly and unequivocally permanent.
They determined that deep natural salt beds offered an ideal medium for the permanent disposal of wastes that would remain radioactive for thousands of years. One advantage to disposal in rock salt is salt creep. High pressure on the salt formation causes the salt to creep, filling in the voids created by mining. Thousands of waste containers have been safely disposed, nearly 1/2 mile underground at WIPP. Over time, the waste containers will be entombed in salt.
What we are faced with here is a national problem. Every commercial plant in the States is faced with the same problem. There's nothing to do with the fuel because the federal government's not performing.
We got a problem. We got a problem in this country that is very, very difficult to solve. We don't know if we got the answers here.
It's a leap to imagine walking, talking, living people 500, 5,000, 10,000 years from now. But the future will come. We can't stop there being a 10,000 years from now. And that stuff will still be there and will still be dangerous.
Basically, we want to make sure that we communicate with the future, what we've stored underground, what those dangers may be.
Digging or drilling into the site could bring radioactivity to the surface.
Hiding it isn't really an option. How do we communicate with the people of the year 4000 or 7000 or 9000 that what's buried there should not be touched?
Congress specified they cannot build the waste isolation pilot plant until a plausible marking system was established that for 10,000 years would warn of the danger at the site.
Are we going to design a system that's going to be safe for those kinds of timescales? I sometimes think it's just an impossible task. But we have this nuclear waste, so we have no choice.
The US Department of Energy commissioned a study on how to communicate the danger into the far future. The key is to create a message that conveys how uninteresting, how unimportant, and how dangerous nuclear waste is. The idea would be to translate a message like this into every United Nations language: Arabic, Chinese, English, French, Russian, and Spanish. There's a reasonable hope that, at least in the next couple thousand years, one of those languages would be understood. But in the scope of hundreds of thousands of years, there's just little expectation that these languages would survive. So, you need to convey the same message without language.
Conflict between these two urges. You want people to notice it, but you don't want people to go there. Those are always going to fight each other.
How do you design a symbol in a way that will last across generations and languages? It turns out that is an incredibly hard thing to do. The meaning of a symbol can change over time, like the Jolly Roger, which wouldn't work for the radioactive threat at the WIPP.
If you're approaching the WIPP facility and you see a skull and crossbones, you might think, hey, this is where the pirates buried their treasure.
So how do you indicate a long-lasting danger across any language?
Modern humans have only existed for about 200,000 years, so one can hardly be sure that the species will survive for the millions of years that the toxic nuclear waste will continue to emit radiation. What's more, one can hardly expect that the dominant civilizations that have nuclear technology today will continue to exist for even thousands of years.
Well, name anything that has persisted for 10,000 years, any institution. There isn't any. The record probably is something like the Catholic Church or the core of the Jewish religion, which tells us something about what really lasts.
The team devised 4 levels of message, each one containing more detail than the last. The design of the site is a level 1 message, the message being that what is here is man-made and was done on purpose. And the design they've gone for, at least for the time being, is this.
So other designers started to focus on creating a warning without inscribed communication by altering the shape of the location itself. And that yielded designs like this.
Spike fields, forbidding blocks, giant pyramids. These designs capitalized on natural instincts of fear and discomfort to keep people away. But even then, they weren't foolproof. Designers couldn't be sure whether they would be perceived as terrifying or fascinating. Spike fields, forbidding blocks, giant pyramids.
What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. There is no remembrance of men of old, and even those who are yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow.
My life's work has been to say that there's a forgotten episode in human history, and that once we take that forgotten episode into account, a high civilization, as many of the myths and traditions of the world attest, that existed during the Ice Age and was destroyed in the cataclysms that brought the last Ice Age to an end. I feel that that's a very neglected possibility by archaeology. Not just neglected, just absolutely ignored as a possibility. And I felt that my role has been to present solid, well-researched, thoroughly documented evidence which challenges that idea.
In the end, what survives is not what people made, but the simple mineral compounds that made people. This, then, is the final fate of humans. In 10,000 years, the Earth itself will have buried most of man's cities.
the unexplainable remnants left by a civilization which once undoubtedly flourished here upon this planet. The most notable, and presumably the evidence which will remain upon our Earth for the longest, being the unimaginably enormous megalithic structures which rest in many areas of Earth, merely re-inhabited by our now well-studied, far more recent ancient ancestors.
These standing stones mark an area once used to bury radioactive wastes. Do not dig here. Do not drill here. These markers were designed to last 10,000 years.
At the end, when we close, the first 100 years is called active institutional controls, and during that first 100 years, you have guards, that are keeping people out and keeping them from drilling. After that, it's the passive institutional controls.
The passive institutional controls consist of 3 elements, and one of them is the designs, the actual markers that'll be left behind after we decommission the site and return it back to public use.
So during the first 100 years, we would be building the passive institutional controls piece, which is the markers, the rooms, putting on the languages, telling the message.
The 41 square kilometre site is surrounded by large surface markers which will be engraved with level 2 messages. A level 2 message isn't much more than go away. It says there's danger here, you should leave it alone. This is in text form and also pictogram form, depicting monks with a scream and a simple face looking like it's eating a lemon. It's hoped that the people of the future won't have changed so much that they can't identify a natural human response to a bad thing. Level 3 messages are also engraved onto the large surface markers and provide more detail about the waste, including where exactly it's buried, how long it should stay buried for, and why it was buried. The centre of the site is marked by a berm and other large surface markers, and in the very middle there's an information centre. This is where the level 4 messages are stored. Level 4 messages will include things like the periodic table to indicate which elements are stored in the facility, star maps to allow the people of the future to calculate when the site was sealed, and world maps showing where other waste sites around the world are. This information will be repeated in a number of buried storage rooms in the hope that they'll survive longer than the surface level information centre. And that's roughly how we're going to tell people 10,000 years from now that we made somewhere bad and they should leave it alone. They thought about what they wanted to say to the people of the future, and they boiled it down to this. This place is a message, and part of a system of messages. Pay attention to it. Sending this message was important to us. We considered ourselves to be a powerful culture. This place is not a place of honour. No highly esteemed deed is commemorated here. Nothing valued is here. What is here is dangerous and repulsive to us. This message is a warning about danger. The danger is in a particular location. It increases toward a centre. The centre of danger is here, of a particular size and shape, and below us. The danger is still present in your time as it was in ours. The danger is to the body, and it can kill. The form of the danger is an emanation of energy. The danger is unleashed only if you substantially disturb this place physically. This place is best shunned and left uninhabited.
So without symbols, without basic illustrations, without physical structures, how can you effectively communicate a warning?
That's where the more philosophical design solutions come in. In 1984, the German Journal of Semiotics published a series of solutions from various scholars. Linguist Thomas Siebiak proposed creating an atomic priesthood, where an exclusive political group would use its own rituals and myths to preserve information about the radioactive areas. And philosophers Françoise Bastide and Paulo Fabre proposed to genetically engineer bioluminescent cats that would glow in the presence of radioactivity. By creating songs and traditions about the danger of glowing cats, the warning could last as long as the oldest relics of civilization we have: culture.
The Ennead, or Nine Gods, was in place in Heliopolis by 2700 BCE and is the one found in the Pyramid texts, which might be the oldest surviving set of religious texts in the world. At the top of this pantheon is a tomb.
Linguist Thomas Siebiak proposed creating an atomic priesthood.
Atum is the great eye of the heavens and of creation. There are multiple versions of sun gods, with Ra representing both the sun and creation, so we can infer that the sun was important to the Egyptians.
Our sun is basically a giant nuclear reactor at the center of our solar system.
Ra is the sun god in Egyptian mythology.
And its priests maintain that Atum and then Ra was the first being, rising and self-creating from the primeval waters.
There was only an immense void they called none that contained Atum, the beginning of all things.
Allah created Adam upon his image.
Ancient Heliopolis, which was a major city of ancient Egypt and was a major centre for religion and learning. The primary temple of the city was known as the Great House or House of Atum. What does survive of Heliopolis, though, is the obelisk of the Temple of Ra Atum. Several of the obelisks in Rome originated from Heliopolis, as did both of Cleopatra's Needles in London and New York. The ancient Egyptian name for the city was Iunu, which means the pillars.
We've allowed Judaism to be claimed by violently messianic West Bank settlers, Christianity by homophobic hypocrites and misogynistic bigots, Islam by suicide bombers. And we've allowed ourselves to be blinded to the fact that no matter whether they claim to be Christians, Jews, or Muslims, militant extremists are none of the above. They're a cult all their own.
How's a brother gonna keep it real on the street with all these ethical and metaphysical uncertainties, my man?
And we have been trained to not see anything in Scripture other than this rigid wooden literalism.
These three properties make DNA a unique storage device.
He was the builder of the Great Pyramid of Giza, erroneously attributed to Cheops.